What's up, everybody? This is Karak with ACG, and welcome to a little bit of a trailer breakdown slash video game discussion about Red Dead Redemption 2. Now, as you guys know, I normally don't break down trailers unless I really do feel like there's something interesting in them, or I really want to break down what's going on with the title. So I haven't really covered Red Dead Redemption 2, but as the new trailer ended up coming out yesterday, and some websites got to go and actually play a couple minutes of the game and see some of the game actually play out, I decided I did want to talk about it. Now, you guys always remember that my type of trailer breakdowns are a little bit different. I'm not just going to be pointing out things and saying, this was said and these kind of things are in the trailer. That is something that is a little bit more normal. This is sort of a mini walk in the walk where we're going to look at the various different elements. We're going to talk about what some people have said about the game that have got to see it, but we're also going to look at how that would affect gameplay for the gamer moving forward. Also, you're going to see some pictures up here. These are usually IGN or some of the other various websites that have got a chance to see it. So all kudos to them for, of course, being able to actually go check it out. So without further ado, let's discuss one of the first things that really interests me, and that's the dynamic weather. Now, we know it does have dynamic weather, and we've certainly seen some weather systems in the game, but a lot of people will ask, what does dynamic really mean? And while the word means one thing, that's not always reflected in titles. The first thing to understand is that, for example, if you want rain to create puddles or you want snow to create piles of snow on corners, that is computationally quite heavy. There's some tricks that you can do, but there's quite a few games that get around that by sort of cheating or not doing it at all. And when you look at Red Dead, I think this one in particular is most likely going to be like the original, where there are locations that have snow, and then you have the chance of snow falling in locations that are bordering that, but they won't affect the trees and the grass and so forth. It's a lot to really have a particulate end up building up on grass or in piles and do that accurately. I'm not saying they won't. I'm just saying we haven't seen enough, and there's one or two pictures that you do see, as well as the trailers, that sort of indicates to me that we're going to see one of those games where you have these geographies where areas are sort of painted with the ability to have snow on the ground, for example, but not necessarily everywhere in the game. What's very interesting, though, when you look at the elements and some other stuff that I'm going to discuss in a moment with the different animal system or different life systems within the game, is the ability for, of course, different creatures to be in some of these areas. And it'll be interesting to note if the game allows, for example, particular creatures that are in major snowy areas to be in the ones that border it when snow does fall, that kind of thing. Because in a lot of games, there's a little bit of flexibility in spawn points for creatures, but it's not really too incredible. If there's a reason for this creature to be in one particular area, a lot of times, regardless of the weather, that creature will be there in that particular location. I would love to see that kind of growth. And if there's any company that could do that, it's probably these guys. Which, you know what, all that does bring us to the animal systems and the different hunting systems that are in the game. So one of the things that's been brought up is there will be a full hunting system built into the title. This is something that we did see in the other game, but it was pretty shallow and appears to be deeper here. One of the first things that was mentioned is that while it's been adjusted to be deeper, one of the things that you will notice is animals can be killed in various ways, which do result in more or less damage to their meat and skin. If extra damage is done to that creature, or depending on how they're killed, it can actually damage whatever it is you're trying to collect. It's not necessarily super new, but a lot of games don't mimic that. They are going to have that in Red Dead Redemption 2, but they're also going to have the fact that the meat can spoil if it goes for too long. And larger creatures that you kill, such as in this picture, you have the deer and one of the biggest damn rabbits I've ever seen in my life. You end up having them go bad, but you can put them on your horse. And so they last a certain amount of time, and you're supposed to go to the butcher's or go to the camp, which I'll discuss in a second as well, and drop that food off. And it's worth more or less depending on how long that'll take. That is one of the areas where we'll never see this in this game, but I would love to see it, where if you're in a cold area, does that mean that maybe the meat takes a little longer than in the hot areas? Who knows? This is, once again, Rockstar. They might do that. But I would love to see that synergy of these different systems, because when you really track who's looked at the game and what they've seen, it's a lot of bullet points that we've seen in other games, but it really comes down to Rockstar and their ability to put all of these systems together and make things a little bit more flexible. It's something that I'm crossing my fingers for. I would love to see that kind of situation occur in-game. With the hunting system, of course, I think we're going to have a crafting system of some kind. It hasn't been mentioned, but we do see something which I guess we can discuss right now, which of course is different clothing outfits for the various different characters in the posse. This is something we've seen in the different trailers. They've changed a bit. But one of the things I want to talk about is just how highly detailed they are. So zooming in here on the pocket, or people will probably say the crotch of this character, you actually see the sliding of the palm, the dirty palm, actually affecting the pants themselves, which is really incredible detail when you look at it. You know, we get a lot of games where they have excellent clothing options, excellent clothing details, but they all look, let's be honest, a little new, or they don't look really lived in. And here we certainly see where that use of the various different elements ends up impacting the clothing textures, even if it doesn't impact over time, which would be pretty crazy other than, let's say, going into water and appearing wet. But having them in the first place does give it a little bit more of a lived in feel, where it sort of feels like it's something that's actually being impacted by other parts of the game. I love that. Also, absolutely another cool detail I have to mention just for a second is the fact that it apparently looks like the saddle horn actually stains the front of his shirt as he's riding, and you can see that little attention to detail here, which sort of elevates it. It's something that, of course, Rockstar is always known for, but it's just phenomenal work right there. Now, something else that was actually mentioned in IGN's coverage is a lot about the camps, or at least a little about the camps and how they work, and the fact that there are active camps that you actually have active where you go to them and people are doing various different things like getting, buckets of water from a lake and or hunting different creatures and bringing them there. One of the things that they did state, and they did tell the IGN staff, was that if you aren't there, it won't stop anybody from doing their work, and it won't stop the camp from working. But it also sounds like there are camps scattered around, and you can move yours to various different places. Additionally, depending on how it is stocked or supplied, it also will then affect your morale. Now, what's interesting to me is how much it could affect your morale. When you look at morale systems in games, and especially you look at games like this with groups, and I'm going to discuss some other issues that could pop up here in a second, I'm not 100% sure how that all will work out. It'll be quite interesting because if you say that you have an effect and then say that you really don't have an effect if you're gone, that to me usually just indicates one of those systems and those gameplay systems that are mostly just positive in their effect. So you get more, you sort of have a status quo in the camp, and you get more if you do better. It won't stop anybody from doing their jobs or anything like that. It will, at least if you look at the horse system, which I'll discuss, which involves how well you get along with your horse, which you make all the jokes you want there. I think that's pretty cool. But it'll, of course, depend, I think, on the group, how well you get along. And you do have various choices in the heists that were shown, and in a couple different story events where you have the choice to do one or the other, sort of a mission choice. That could actually play out with the morale system, depending on how everything works together. And there was indications that, like, sometimes you would come into the camp and people be singing and laughing and talking and just being real jovial. And then other times when there was no food, or they were in a really bad area, or things just weren't going well, then they would be quieter and more subdued. That could be quite well done, and certainly something that I would find very enjoyable. It's also a place where I'm a little nervous in the future we might see microtransactions, because I could certainly see them saying, hey man, you want to pay $5 and you can get this bucket of water that gives you a +1 to your water rating for your camp. And I don't want to think about that right now, but it is something that we know is probably going to be in the game at some point. I'll skip on that for now and not really mention that much anymore, but it is something that I think as we get closer to release, I'd like to sort of know how many of these systems can or will or won't be impacted by any kind of microtransactions, because it does look like there's a lot here, and I would love to sort of be uninfected by it. Moving on from there, interestingly enough, they have stated that the game has a connection between you and your horse, basically what your bond is like. And if your bond is better, the horse will respond better to stressful situations. Now, we already know there can be animal attacks, pretty much any game that's been released lately, and of course this game will have those as well. And the horse will break or bolt more often if you don't have a great bond. This is going to be interesting for a newcomer to the game, or a new save game, for instance, because if you don't have that great of a bond, is it going to be one of those moments a little bit like maybe Far Cry 5, where it can turn into anarchy because your horse bolts, you run, you find it, you leap on it, and then it bolts again because there's another animal spawned nearby, or you just have the damn bloody Wolverines running around killing everything. That, to me, is what's going to be really interesting to see how all these systems work, because if you look at the morale system of the people themselves, they most likely won't have connections with their steeds. So it'll also be interesting to see how Rockstar connects everybody else to the world around them and if they follow the same rules as you. Because I would love to see the occasional time where maybe one of the horses ended up bolting and throwing a guy off because maybe your entire morale was low, or maybe it's a new horse for that guy too. You get too much anarchy sometimes, you get too much chaos. And just like we saw, let's say, with Oblivion when that first came out and the ideas of what the world system was going to allow versus what it did, sometimes you have to crunch that back a little bit or you get complete and utter chaos. Not saying I wouldn't like that, but it'll be interesting to see if they do or if they think players do. All of these situations coming together, I think, really do allow for something that I've always liked in open world games, which is that overlapping of the various systems to make them feel interconnected, not just simply in their skill list or their bullet list. And what I mean by that is, for example, like I said, morale. Does it just affect the people that you're with in the posse? Or does it also affect, again, their horses? Or does it affect these other elements outside of it? It would be even cool if maybe you went into a tavern and somebody said, yeah, we heard that posse was, wasn't doing very well and that kind of stuff, and they sort of indicate your mood. It would be interesting to see all of those things and how they interact with each other over time as you're playing the game. And you know what? Let's wrap up this little thing with a bit about the missions. Now, one of the things that we found out recently is that audio cues can end up alerting you to missions in your local area or things you can do. For example, if you're in the camp, you might be able to actually hear that you need food or you need water or something to that effect, but you don't actually get a pop-up that says you need to go do this. And you can choose to do it and sort of how you go about it and what your timing is for that. Of course, you're still going to have your main missions that are going to pop up. I'm sure you're still going to have different cutscenes that bookend various elements, but a lot of it doesn't. They've actually stated that some of it is sort of a continuous camera. I guess you could compare it a little bit to God of War, but that will mean that, at least for me, towns and the cities, the places that you go, the more urban areas versus the rural might be incredibly interesting to sort of traverse and explore in. It was something that I think when you play Red Dead, the original, was a little bit lacking. Other than poker and one or two things, you really couldn't do a ton in the towns. Now, that was, of course, the way the game was set up, and that was totally fine. But this kind of more organic storytelling makes me believe that being in the cities, being in those towns, being in the places with more people is going to be highly interesting compared to the prior game. And of course, with all those missions and all of the different things that you're going to be able to do, I think the characters really are going to become incredibly important. One of the things that was so excellent, one of those elements that you really noticed about Red Dead, even if you weren't a big fan, is that their characters were well established. They did a very good job having a sense of past and future past, that kind of thing. It's stuff I've talked about before, where you come upon the scene and it feels like people have lived there at least for a small amount of time. Things aren't just happening right there around you. One of the areas that I think that this is going to play out in an incredible tone, even ignoring the fact that Red Dead is, of course, the sequel, and this will be a prequel, is the gang and the different characters that you're going to meet. We already know some of the characters, but we don't know all of them. And additionally, we really don't know a couple of their fates, but we know others. It's going to be very interesting to see how a lot of these characters get from the point of this game to Red Dead. And really how Rockstar is going to handle danger in the game, because danger is going to be quite important, but you certainly don't want to put maybe one of the posse members that you know is alive in the second one, or in the first one, depending on how you think of these things. You really don't want to try to base the game around them. So is it going to be around the unknowns, or is it just going to be around the main characters and sort of how they're dealing with the situation prior to the original game? Such a spectacular amount of fiction to go on here that they could do a really good job not only solidifying the past that a lot of us have asked about, like Marston's scar on his face, something that it certainly does look different. This is something noticed by many people, that it looks a little bit newer here in these pictures, which obviously it would be due to the years ago that this was, but it also looks like it might be fresh, so we might be able to see how those kind of things happen. I would love to see the game sort of jump into that and take some risks and apply not only storytelling to the characters that we already know, but really unleash the characters that we don't know and a lot of those unknowns, and sort of explain, how they went unknown. One of the things about good fiction is, even if a character disappears, even if a character is there for a moment and gone, usually they serve a purpose. So a lot of the characters that we don't know, or any of them that we don't, the idea that we already have the sequel and maybe they weren't mentioned there. How do they sort of shuffle them off without making them appear non-consequential to the gamer? That to me is probably one of the best elements to this. So when you look at the game, there's a lot of information coming up. It looks like this was the PS4. What they've said is that this is the native PS4, not the PS4 Pro or the Xbox X footage, and that really bodes well for the game. This is one of those titles that may be a little bit like GTA 5, where because of the long amount of time that has come and gone between these titles and how long it's been worked on, that we could see that attention to detail that really isn't available to most developers other than perhaps a CD Projekt Red or these folks. And I think that that, to me at least, is probably the most exciting bit. So anyway, that's it for me for a little bit about Red Dead 2. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you dislike the video, give it a thumbs down. Maybe check out Twitter or Patreon. Patreon's how I continue to give you guys videos like this and reviews that aren't 2 minutes long and filled with sponsored bullcrap. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.